controversial and unsatisfactory anime and manga endings seem to be a pretty common occurrence these days. And with that, the flames of war in fandom spaces ignite. I'm sure you've seen by now the meme themes as such floating around, usually used as a counter to those that try to defend a story against criticism by arguing thematic depth. But really, how important are themes to a story? How do they work? And why should you care? Today, I'm going to dive into the roles of themes in storytelling, and I'm going to do so by talking about how they work or don't in two series: Chainsaw Man, the hot button topic of the moment, and Frieren Beyond Journey's End, the anime that is still almost universally praised. First, before actually getting to our two examples, let's have a brief look at the theory behind analyzing themes in storytelling, so that we can establish a base of understanding. And I'll start by clearing up a bit the difference between topic and theme, because too often I see people calling anything happening in a story a theme. The topic of a story is what it's about on the surface. Things like war, love, revenge. That's just subject matter, and it says nothing about what the story is actually doing. A theme is the argument the story makes about that topic. Think something along the lines of war destroys the humanity of the people it claims to protect, not just war is bad. I mention this because I see a lot of talk that often mistakes a topic for a theme. For example, having your character experience trauma and then recovering isn't the same as saying something about trauma. The presence of a heavy and serious subject matter is not a theme in and of itself. Now, people have been arguing about this for a very long time. It didn't start with Reddit users with too much time on their hands. Aristotle was already thinking about it in the 4th century BC. His basic position was that plot is the most important element of a story, even called it the soul of drama. Theme, or what he called thought, is also important, but it is supposed to come out from the plot, not be shoved on top of it. If your characters have to stop and give a speech about the meaning of friendship for your theme to land, Aristotle would say you've already failed. Fast forward a couple of thousand years and you get the new critics who went a bit further. Their whole thing was that in a really good work of fiction, you cannot separate the theme from the way it's told. The meaning exists in the specific images, tone, structure, basically in how the story is packaged. They had a beautiful name for this, the Heresy of Paraphrase. Summarizing a theme in a sentence says nothing of value about it. Saying the theme of Vinland Saga is that the revenge is bad, or the theme of Moby Dick is obsession, is technically true and also almost completely useless. The role of themes in a story is also debated amongst critics. There are those that argue that the best fiction has the role of thinking through moral problems in a way that abstract reasoning can't. But also those who believe themes don't actually exist to convey truths at all. Instead, storytelling helps people engage with what some call perennial human concerns. You don't watch Frieren to learn that you should appreciate the people in your life before they're gone, any more than you read something like Anna Karenina to learn that adultery has consequences. The aim is to have a specific kind of experience around that subject matter. Okay, so how important are themes actually? Well, it's generally debated, and there are 3 camps. Camp 1 says they're essential. The English writer Ian Forster called a story without meaningful rhythm just a chronicle of events. Camp 2, the middle position, says themes matter, but only if they're earned by the story. There's a great quote that applies here. Theme is not what you say, theme is what the story proves. If the theme isn't demonstrated through the logical consequences of what happens to specific characters, it's just there for decoration. Camp 3 is wary of the research for themes and symbols in stories altogether. The Russian writer Nabokov famously looked down on what he called message hunting, this idea that you read a book to extract a lesson, like cracking open a fortune cookie. For him, the storytelling experience involved the senses. Now, this doesn't mean that stories shouldn't have themes, and anyone familiar with his works would know that that isn't the case. Think of it in terms of the curtains are blue argument. The color of the curtains might be the author's way of reinforcing his character's depressed state, for example. But ultimately, the purpose of this detail is to make the reader feel a certain way, immerse him in the atmosphere of the story. If this doesn't work, blue being a color associated with sadness is just pointless trivia. Now, I think all 3 of these positions are pointing at the same problem from different angles. Themes work when they grow out of character and plot. You shouldn't need a character to turn to the camera and explain what the story means. The story should be what it means. When they don't work is when the story identifies a thematic territory with great potential and kinda just gestures at it, without ever actually going anywhere with it. I think that's the problem themes and such alludes to. The performance of a theme without the commitment to proving it. And with all of this in mind, let's go back to what I promised earlier and look at Chainsaw Man and Frieren. Two very different stories that are both trying in different ways to say something. A brief note on spoilers. My analysis will touch on the entirety of these series as they are presented in the manga, but until the last part, I won't mention any particular plot point that hasn't been animated yet. I'll mark a small segment at the end, addressing a few points from the manga, especially regarding Chainsaw Man and its ending. Also, a small reminder that if you enjoy this kind of analytical content, I will be making more of these kinds of videos, so maybe consider subscribing if you're interested. It does help keep me motivated. Anyway, on with the show. You might be wondering why I chose two series so very different on the surface. Frieren might be melancholic and slow, and Chainsaw Man might be loud and chaotic, but that's just the packaging. And both styles can succeed or fail, depending on how they are used in the story. Chainsaw Man's main themes revolve around the cycle of control and exploitation. How people who grow up with nothing will give up their entire sense of self-worth for even a tiny bit of comfort. And Fujimoto does a brilliant job in the beginning of constructing a plot around this notion without telling you directly. The Denji we are introduced to is so poor he sold organs to pay off his dead father's debt to the Yakuza. He eats cigarettes, he gets compared to an obedient dog a lot, but that's not an insult to him. In the grand scheme of things, he might have thought dogs actually have a pretty good life. From that point of view, of course Makima would seem like an upgrade in owner. And the themes do emerge from the logic of the plot, not from speeches. Nobody in Chainsaw Man gives a tech talk about exploitation. The exploitation is the story. Events usually occur in a certain way. Someone offers Denji something he's desperate for, like affection, normalcy, connection, some boob touching maybe, and in return he gives off a piece of his agency. After all, a person defined entirely by their wants is a person with no protection against whoever decides to exploit those wants. You can't really say that Denji is being corrupted by Makima, or any of the other characters really. They use who he already is and his desires against him. Frieren does things a bit differently, creating its themes from how the story moves rather than the specific actions its characters engage in. This works particularly well because I would argue the main theme isn't so much about time, though that is part of it, as it is about the relativity of individual experience. Frieren is all past and future, not so much present. She's so extended in time, has lived through so much, that individual human lives barely leave a mark. When Frieren cries at Himon's funeral, it's because she's realizing for the first time that she doesn't understand. The subtle detail to this is that it's not a revelation, there is no certainty, just the feeling that there might be something more behind individual moments. She feels that she might be too late, but really isn't sure for what, and the series doesn't give the impression that there is a predefined answer. And that's the whole story in a nutshell, the gap between living through something and truly experiencing it. Well, to be honest, that description kinda puts me in that whole heresy of paraphrase thing that I mentioned. Because it's not just the theme itself, most themes you can think of have been done hundreds of times before. What matters here is the execution, and part of that execution is toying with the way the audience experiences time passing in story. Slow, seemingly trivial moments can last almost an entire episode, while you might discover that several months have passed between episodes, or chapters if you're a manga reader. It speaks directly to the notion that you can't separate theme from form. The structure of Frieren is an essential part of the theme, and like in the case of a sunrise or a plain foot bath, the essence is in the way they are experienced, not so much in the play-by-play of what happened. Now, getting back to Chainsaw Man, the story is, among other things, a reversal of your basic hero's journey narrative. You have your usual references to loss, betrayal and innocence, and some themes of teamwork, even though it's often used as a pretense. And look, this kind of deconstruction isn't inherently valuable, it really depends on what it's trying to achieve. And if you are someone expecting your hero to overcome his past, have some sort of revelation and reinvent himself, Fujimoto makes a good point in asking, indirectly, why? Why expect that? Why think that a simple-minded teenager who's known nothing but abuse, with no support, no education, no one to teach him love or self-worth, would have lofty ideals and strong values? He only reaches for the most basic of desires because those desires have never been truly met, and he doesn't know the value of something he's never had. In Reze's arc, she mentions Aesop's fable about the town mouse and the country mouse. Would he rather be the town mouse who gets more delicious food at the cost of more predators, or the country mouse with plainer food but safety? But what that particular story arc seems to imply is that the choice might not even be available. It's more of an illusion, really. Is escape and genuine growth even possible within a system designed to keep you compliant? And some of the secondary themes enhance this perspective as well. The story points towards institutional governmental corruption, with those in power using and sacrificing those they hold control over in order to maintain their status. Chainsaw Man's world is primarily made up of abusers and abused, with almost no one left to offer support and guidance that might help break the cycle. The devils are in a way presented as a natural evolution of this state of things. Secondary characters, primarily in part 1 of course, contribute through their own story to this view of the world. Think of Aki's character, for example. He's first introduced as someone whose attitude contrasts with Denji. Unlike him, he has strong convictions, motivations. He presents himself as less of a slave to his own petty desires. Yet, none of it ultimately saves him, and he's just as much a victim of exploitation as Denji is. Frieren's story takes her in the opposite direction as a character. If Denji's experience over his short life had made him into this emotionally immature young man, Frieren's lack of social awareness seems to be a deliberate choice cultivated over hundreds of years. Her initial detached demeanor can be seen as a potential coping mechanism for the constant cycle of loss she endures. She's adjusting her inner self and the way she perceives the world to be more in line with her relationship with the passage of time. What she discovers is that when there is no sense of urgency or fear of missing out, there's no incentive to actively and presently live. "I'll do it tomorrow. I'll catch the next sunrise," is repeated without realizing what is lost. But this is where her problem lies, because identity requires memory, which isn't just the accumulation of experience, but also the active decision to hold them and the people involved in your attention, to let them matter enough to change you. Frieren has experienced an enormous amount without being significantly changed by almost any of it. Her journey with Fernand Stark is explicitly set up as a repeat of her original journey with Himmel's party, only this time she's paying attention. Unlike before, she actively tries to understand and appreciate, both for her companions and for herself, because ultimately, our relationship and our experiences shape our inner self. They are what offer us grounding. Her relationship with Himmel can be seen in part as a sort of tragedy of unrequited or missed love in the conventional sense, but part of it is also Frieren simply wondering, did Himmel see more of her than even she understood? It's a pretty existentialist view of things, where the gaze of those around us grounds and shapes us, and for the first time, Frieren feels like she might need that grounding. In this regard, her journey can be seen as more of a way of gaining her personhood, of sculpting her inner self. So, hearing all of this, you might think I see no flaws in this story, and you would be very wrong. Let's start with Chainsaw Man, and I'll say it, yes, part 2 does go downhill quite a bit. But not immediately. I actually felt it had a promising start, with new characters and devils that had the potential to solidify and further expand the existing themes. Unfortunately, it started feeling pretty directionless after a while. Character arcs were abandoned or just fizzled out, and some of the larger themes about institutional governmental control and abuse, or mankind's corruption, felt like they were there more to lure people in than to actually provide an interesting subplot. I did not have as big a problem with Denji's character's portrayal as other people did, but I do understand why the execution for it might feel underwhelming. When portraying a character stuck in a cycle of abuse, self-sabotage, and so on, there is a fine line between reinforcing that thematic choice and simply repeating the same beats that worked before. And with Chainsaw Man Part 2, I'm not only sure which side of the line the story falls on. And of course, the ending feels more like a quick wrapping up of the story rather than a pointed conclusion with established themes. With Frieren, its flaws are quieter, which is on theme really, because everything about Frieren is quieter. The story has a more episodic feel. Frieren encounters something in a town that reminds her of mortality, or of Himmel, or of time passing. She grows a little, then moves on to the next town, which can work great to show the subtle nuances that exist in different perspectives, even in relation to the most trivial of things. The issue comes from the fact that this recipe isn't without an expiration date, and without a new approach, I feel like some of these encounters will start having diminishing returns soon. There is a risk of reader-watcher fatigue, kinda fitting with the manga being on hiatus right now. The other possible pitfall with Frieren are the demons. And no, not because I have anything against the notion of a fictional species incapable of emotions. The story does use this element to its advantage. This lack of emotional range is shown to be actually limiting, and the demons are an interesting tool to underscore how the range of human emotions actually amplifies our lived experiences. One of the next arcs to be animated will illustrate just that. The downside is that this is a very limited tool by its nature, and having your main villains portrayed with this little nuance, well, it kinda begs the question, just how much nuance can one get from future encounters? Alright, from here on out, I'm going to go full manga spoilers for both Chainsaw Man and Frieren. These are just some of my thoughts regarding specific plots. If you're not caught up and don't want to be spoiled, skip to the conclusion. So, about Denji not growing. I actually think this is a defensible choice. The whole point of Chainsaw Man seems to be that growth requires conditions that allow for it, and Denji has never had those conditions. He went from dead slavery to being Makima's pet to being a public spectacle. At no point does anyone give this kid a stable foundation to grow from. So yeah, him being stuck makes sense thematically, but the execution of that stagnation is where it falls apart for me, because the story keeps using the same version of the same delivery. A woman offers Denji something with a sexual implication, he easily goes for it, gets burned, rinse and repeat. After a certain point, this stops feeling like a theme being explored and starts feeling like a pattern the story can break out of. In order for the message to land, I feel the story needed a different angle building up the same idea. Asa, for example, a girl trapped in her own cycle of isolation and self-sabotage and driven by guilt, was the perfect candidate to achieve that. The theme of stagnation could have hit twice as hard without repeating the same note, having these two characters with the same prison, but with completely different walls. Unfortunately, I think like Fujimoto-sensei stopped caring about her character arc halfway through part 2. And then we get to the ending and Pochita's speech, and well, having your theme delivered in a monologue by a character who hasn't been an active participant for most of part 2 is the definition of a story not earning its conclusion. I also didn't like how Pochita's speech put too much emphasis on Denji's problems revolving around him being Chainsaw Man. Because the story spent 200 chapters showing us these issues are way bigger than one person. Yes, being Chainsaw Man gave him a superficial high with fame, attention, thrill, but the rot underneath was always systemic. That's also why the whole timeline reset thing at the end doesn't work for me, because it is packaged as a happy ending, but nothing in the story has convinced me that Denji's life actually gets better without Chainsaw Man. The systems that kept him down are still there. The trauma is still there. You can't take the chainsaw out of the boy, but you haven't taken the boy out of the world that broke him. It's great seeing Nayuta and Power again, but they both have their own demons, and literally in this case, and neither really seems fit to provide Denji with the support and guidance he desperately needs. And one more thing. Having the War Devil and Death Devil conflict be the centerpiece of part 2 had so much thematic potential. Think about it. War and death, two of the most recognizable human fears, with millennia philosophical weight behind them. It feels like the story wants to say something big here. It hints at it, gestures toward it, sets up pieces, and then doesn't really follow through. Now for Frieren. The Golden Land arc is probably one of my favorite in the entire manga. We actually get a demon who tries to understand human emotion, and the story actually makes a powerful statement through this subplot. Macht's character generally has the instinct that something is missing, but in the end, no solution exists because there is no bridging the gap. The problem with this is that it feels like the manga already played its strongest card with regards to the demons. If you're going to commit to demons being irredeemable, Macht is a beautiful way to do it. But it also closes a door that I think the story's themes would have benefited from leaving open a little longer. Because it means every future demon encounter is going to carry less weight. The other thing I want to mention is the Goddess Monument arc and its time travel subplot. See, Frieren's entire journey is built in part on anticipation. She's traveling to the place where souls rest to see him again. That's pretty much the emotional engine of the whole manga. And then the time travel subplots lets us see the reunion early, and while I wouldn't call it bad, it doesn't land quite with the weight you'd expect from a reunion the entire series has been building towards. And the bigger issue is that it kinda dampens the anticipation for the actual conclusion. That's a tough position for any potential ending to be in. So yeah, I think both of these stories have real flaws. Chainsaw Man's are fully realized at this point, the manga is done and the cracks are permanent. Frieren's are mostly still potential, the manga is ongoing, the story has room to address or deepen the questions it's raised. But here's what I want to say in the end. I think both of these stories are still absolutely worth engaging with. And honestly, I think the best way to experience either of them, or any work of fiction for that matter, is to not fixate on where you think the story should go. Don't hold it hostage to the ending you've already written for it in your head. Try to actually be present with what's happening in front of you, kinda how Frieren is learning to actively be present in the moment. And I think that's maybe the best advice for engaging with any story. Let it be what it is, and even if the execution ends up being flawed and really what isn't, don't let it completely dampen your experience. If nothing else, you'd at least be able to argue about it from the perspective of someone who knows what they're talking about.